This summer, while traveling in the Galapagos, I learned something surprising from a cactus. As we stepped onto one of the islands, the guide turned to the children with us, all of whom are native to Southern California and know not to touch a cactus. And she said, "Go ahead, touch the cactus." We all looked at each other and her with worried pause, and she said, "It's okay, look." And she took her hand and petted the fine hairs of the cactus, which were indeed not sharp at all. Our guide explained that in the unique ecosystem of the Galapagos, some cacti have evolved with fewer, smaller, and softer spines because they do not face the same pressures as their mainland relatives. In other words, they no longer need their sharp spikes for defense. I began thinking about this evolutionary adaptation and how it represents a profound and hopeful shift. When environmental pressures change, life finds new ways to thrive, redirecting energy from defense to flourishing. And I could not help but think about how wonderful it will be when we can use our energies, especially the massive amounts of energies we have been spending since October 7th, on our own personal and communal spikes and defenses. On the mainland, spikes mean survival. On the islands, spikes are wasted energy. As we sit on this Yom Kippur, I want to invite you to consider, where are we still sharpening spikes we no longer need? What defenses have we outgrown? As we were sadly reminded just this morning in Manchester, there are some defenses which we must keep up for now. But I started dreaming for the day when we can pivot, when we can redirect our energies from mere survival toward growth and renewal. In these moments of transformation, or even in the moment where we dream about that future transformation, we echo the words that have sustained our people for generations. Od lo avda tikvatenu. Our hope is not lost. And perhaps it's no accident that our tradition offers us language to describe this very tension. On the High Holy Days, we wish each other L'Shana Tova, to a good year. But the Hebrew gives us more. The word shana, year, comes from the root lishanot, to change. That same root also gives us lishnot, to repeat. A year then is not merely a journey through time, but a cycle of both change and repetition. Every year, we hope for something new, but we also fall into old patterns. That tension, as my therapist reminds me, is the human condition, to repeat and yet to slowly change. Perhaps we can consider change not just as a pivot for survival, but for sacred disruption. Of course, pivoting is not new to the Jewish community. The destruction of the temples brought about the most radical pivots in Jewish ritual practice by shifting away from sacrifices in Jerusalem and toward local synagogues. And centuries later, we learned the Yiddish proverb, say it with me, we plan and God laughs. Now notice, it's not cruel laughter, but recognition that our rigid plans often break. Yet, our deeper hope remains unbroken. We saw this firsthand this summer. On Thursday, June 12th, Israel launched a surprise aerial campaign against Iran. Our plans for an intergenerational trip to Israel dissolved in an instant. The pain was real. Some of our members were in Israel. How could we get them out? And closer to heart, Miles, one of our B'nai Mitzvah students, was set to become a bar mitzvah on this trip. We moved from excitement for this trip to shock, to fear, and yes, to grief. And then, somehow, back to joy, asking, how can we make sure we celebrate him and his accomplishments now that we won't have his service in Shar HaNegev? We could have frozen, clinging to our spikes, giving in to despair, but instead, we pivoted. We dreamed. We went through about 5 different iterations of how Miles' service could have looked, including a small ceremony with just me and his family in a hotel on the beaches of Greece with a little consecration Torah. But we eventually created a service in our chapel with his rabbis, his family, and with the rest of the crew who were meant to be with him in Israel. The service was surreal. It was emotional. But it was also one of the more beautiful B'nai Mitzvah our community has ever facilitated. This was not just Miles' resilience on display. This was our community's. This beautiful moment showed that pivots are not only personal, they can be collective acts of hope. Our tradition teaches us that flexibility is not a weakness. It's wisdom. The ability to pivot is not a sign of failed planning, but a spiritual maturity that is built with the internalized resilience that our hope is not lost. Now, I know that this is a phrase that we have said a lot through these High Holy Days, but its roots are deeper than the international anthem of the Jewish people. The Hebrew phrase, Od lo avda tikvatenu, our hope is not lost, comes to us from Naftali Hertz's Imber's poem, Tikvatenu. The inclusion of these words is meant to be an intentional inversion of the prophet Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones, where the people cry out, Avda tikvatenu, our hope is lost. These words of despair come from the dead whom Ezekiel has awakened, breathing spirit back into their dry bones. They reflect Israel's disbelief, even in the face of the astounding miracle they have experienced. By declaring that hope is not lost, Imber transformed the prophet's vision of despair into determination, exile into assurance. Tikva, hope, therefore, is not wishful thinking. It is an expectation. When we pivot, we do not abandon hope. We allow hope to redirect our energy toward new possibilities. We see this too in Unatana Tokef, which includes this awe and yes, even fear-filled statement. B'Rosh Hashanah yikatevun, u'v'yom tzom Kippur yechatemun. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on the fast of Yom Kippur it is sealed. But sealed does not mean sentenced. It just means that the world has shifted, and now we get to choose how to meet it. After all, the prayer ends by acknowledging that teshuvah, tefillah, and tzedakah, repentance, prayer, and righteous action can pivot the decree. This is not about changing God's mind. It's about changing our response. When the cactus no longer needs sharp spikes, it redirects that energy toward better fruit. When we no longer need to defend our original plans, we can redirect our energy toward adaptation and growth. The Talmud offers a cautionary tale about how we respond to a changing world around us. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived at a time when Roman oppression was suffocating Jewish life. He and his son, Rabbi Elazar, hid in a cave for 13 years, immersed in Torah study. When they emerged from the cave, what they saw crushed them. Ordinary people plowing their fields, tending their vineyards, living life in what seemed to them quite ordinary at best and fully assimilating at worst. Upon seeing this, their intensity flared. Indeed, the Talmud even says, every place that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son directed their eyes was immediately burned. How many of us have experienced that feeling? That frustration when the world does not live up to our hopes, and our first reaction is to scorch it with our judgment or a scathing comment on social media. But a heavenly voice rebuked them. God says, "Did you emerge to destroy my world? Return to your cave." When they finally emerged again, Rabbi Elazar still scorched with his eyes, but Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai healed with his. From zeal to compassion, from spikes to fruit. Holiness, he discovered, does not only live in the caves of Torah, it flourishes in the everyday pivots of life. Over the past few years, how many of us have emerged from our own caves, whether literal pandemic lockdowns, periods of introspection, or times of withdrawal, only to find the world has not changed according to our own expectations? Perhaps the Talmud is inviting us to consider that a pivot is not just about adapting to the world, but learning to engage a changed world by softening our gaze, shifting from judgment to compassion, letting go of the spikes that no longer serve us. Isaiah offers the same invitation in the Shevet Nechemta, the 7 Haftarot of consolation read between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. Even as he predicts the destruction of Jerusalem, he insists, "Nachamu, nachamu ami, comfort, comfort my people." He does not deny suffering, but he insists that we comfort twice. Sometimes we need more than one reminder that hope and the pivot from despair are still even possible. Rabbi Dr. Michael Marmer teaches, when it comes to the history of Jewish anxiety, the lines between political, theological, and existential concerns have often been blurred. We ask ourselves, will we survive? Will the Jewish future be recognizable and desirable? Rabbi Marmer's approach to anxieties can be termed bear hunt stoicism. We cannot pass over these challenges, nor can we float above them or go around them. We have to work through them, perhaps comforted in the knowledge that this is what Jews have done for as long as there have been Jews. And here, Marmer is referencing the last stanza of Imber's Tikvatenu. "Hear, O my brothers in the lands of exile, the voice of one of our visionaries, who declares that only with the very last Jew, only there is the end of our hope." We know from our lived experience, whether it is world events, an ever-changing and anxiety-inducing political climate, navigating relationships with others, or even navigating a challenging health diagnosis, we must walk on with hope in our hearts. As we affirm our hope is not lost, we remember that hope is not passive waiting, but active adaptation. We find ways to work through challenges using the wisdom of generations, whether adapting a bar mitzvah service, facing Jewish anxiety with bear hunt determination, or embracing the prophetic vision of the 7 Haftarot of consolation. We can't go around illness or war or broken relationships, but we can go through them together, holding on to one another and holding on to hope. When we sing Od Lo Avda Tikvatenu, we are not only declaring that our hope survives, but that it transforms. Like the cactus redirecting energy from spikes to fruit, we can redirect our energy from defending what was to nurturing what can be. To pivot is not to give up. It is to claim the wisdom of our tradition, that hope transforms. Our call this Yom Kippur is to look honestly at the spikes we no longer need, the defenses, the rigid plans, the scorched judgments, and to redirect that energy into growth, compassion, resilience, and renewed hope. Personally and communally, our sacred task is to bear fruit. In a world that often feels hopeless, we are the people who sing Od lo avda tikvatenu, not because we're naive, but because we've learned, generation after generation, that hope isn't about getting what we planned. It's about finding blessing in what becomes possible when we are brave enough to embrace the pivot. Chatima Tova.